In the end, she was right. That was the only truth left standing. The girl Lily. She had been right the whole terrible time. That single thought was a relentless drumbeat against the frantic rhythm of the rain battering my windshield, a solitary lighthouse beam cutting through the suffocating darkness that had become my world. She had offered me her story, a fragile, trembling gift, and I had let a small, dismissive sound escape my lips. A sound that had shattered everything. Now, sitting in the cold silence of my car, the only sound was the ragged, desperate tempo of my own breathing, each inhale a gasp, each exhale a sob I couldn't release. I could still hear her voice, a faint, pleading whisper beneath the storm. But back then, a universe ago, just 24 hours earlier, I wasn't listening. Before I continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, comment below, and leave your like. It helps a lot. They tell you at the academy that the system is built on a foundation of trust. Trust in the procedures, trust in your colleagues, and most importantly, trust that when a child finally musters the impossible courage to speak their truth, someone will be there to listen. I was supposed to be that someone. My name is Sarah Jenkins, and for 12 years I was a senior social worker with Child Protective Services. I wore the title like armor, convinced I was one of the good ones, a warrior standing on the front lines, making a real, tangible difference in a world filled with shadows. I believed I was the light. Then a 15-year-old girl named Lily walked into the sterile beige box of my office, and I made a choice. It wasn't a conscious decision, not a grand, dramatic turning point, but a quiet, insidious moment of careless disbelief. A moment that didn't just crack the foundations of my life but detonated them. It exposed a truth so corrosive, so profoundly dark, it threatened to swallow every good thing I thought I knew about myself, about the ghosts of my own past, and about the very system I had sworn a sacred oath to uphold. It all came crashing down in a single catastrophic day. 24 hours. That's all it took for the quiet laughter of condescension to die in my throat and be reborn as a scream that had been buried inside me for years. If you've ever felt like your voice was a whisper in a hurricane, or that a terrible wrongness was churning just beneath the placid surface of your life, then you need to hear this. It all began on a Tuesday, which is invariably how these life-altering cataclysms seem to start, disguised as just another mundane day on the calendar. The air in my office was heavy, a stale concoction of burnt coffee, cheap disinfectant, and the papery decay of 1,000 tragic case files. I used to call it the official scent of crisis management. My desk was a mountain range of paperwork, each file a life condensed into sterile forms and checkboxes. Between the crushing caseloads, the labyrinth of bureaucratic red tape, and the relentless, soul-leeching emotional drain, the job grinds you down. Your empathy, once a vibrant, responsive muscle, begins to feel like a chronic sprain. You learn to build a callus, a thick, protective layer over your heart, because you know that without it, the sheer weight of it all would not just crush you, it would obliterate you. My supervisor, David, a man whose weary eyes had seen far too much, popped his head through my doorway, not quite entering the chaos. "Got a new one for you, Sarah. Feels like it's in your wheelhouse. Adopted placement, 15 years old. Name's Lily Anderson. Her foster parents, the McGowans, called in. They say she's been acting out." "Acting out how?" I asked, my gaze still glued to the form I was completing, my pen moving on autopilot. The usual flavor of teenage angst, apparently. But with a twist. They say she's making up stories. Fantasies. They're worried she's not settling in. A deep, involuntary sigh escaped me. Another one. I know how callous that sounds, how jaded. But after a decade in this field, you don't see individuals anymore. Not at first. You see patterns, repeating cycles of trauma and response. Troubled teens, especially those navigating the turbulent waters of the foster system, often construct elaborate narratives. It's a cry for attention when they feel invisible, a way to process unspeakable trauma through metaphor, a desperate, clawing grab for a sliver of control in a life where they have none. I'd seen it a dozen times. I thought I knew exactly what I was walking into. When Lily was shown into my office, she seemed impossibly small for her age, swallowed by the oversized visitor's chair. She had wide, dark, haunted eyes that seemed to absorb all the light in the room, leaving everything dimmer. She perched on the absolute edge of the cushion, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees, a small, frightened bird poised for instant flight. Her gaze was fixed, not on me, but on a nondescript spot on the wall just over my left shoulder, as if something far more interesting or far less threatening was there. "Lily," I began, consciously softening my voice to the gentle, non-threatening tone I'd perfected over the years. "I'm Sarah. Your parents, the McGowans, told me you've been having some trouble at the new house. Can you tell me what's been going on?" The silence that followed was immense. The cheap plastic clock on the wall seemed to tick with the force of a hammer striking an anvil. Each second stretched into an eternity. Finally she spoke, her voice so faint it was barely a breath of sound. "It's the house. It's wrong." "Wrong how, Lily? Is it the school? The neighborhood?" She shook her head, a barely perceptible motion. "No, the house itself. There are noises," she whispered, her eyes still locked on the wall. "Whispers. They come from inside the walls. And sometimes, things move. Not a lot, just a little. A book will slide on a shelf when no one is near it. A door I know I closed will be open." I kept my face a perfect mask of calm, practiced concern. It's a mask you wear so often it starts to feel like your own skin. "Old houses make noises, Lily. They settle. Pipes groan, wood creaks. It's very common." "No," she insisted, and for the first time, a flicker of strength entered her voice. Her eyes darted to mine for a brief second before flitting away. "This is different. There's a cold spot in my room. Right by the closet. It doesn't matter how high we turn the heat. It's always freezing right there. Like standing in a walk-in freezer. And the whispers, they say a name." I leaned forward, my professional curiosity piqued despite my skepticism. My pen was poised over my notepad. "What name do they say, Lily?" Her eyes finally met mine, and in their depths, I saw something that stopped my breath. It wasn't teen angst or a theatrical play for attention. It was pure, primal, unadulterated fear. "Eleanor," she whispered, the name itself seeming to chill the air between us. "They keep saying, Eleanor knows." And that's when I did it. It wasn't a loud, mocking guffaw. It was so much worse. It was a quiet, internal chuckle that manifested as a small, pitying smile. The sound of condescension. The sound an adult makes when a small child insists there's a monster hiding under the bed. It was a sound that said, without words, "You poor, silly, imaginative thing." "Lily," I said, setting my pen down with a soft, final click. My tone was gentle, the one I used to de-escalate, but the message was brutally clear. A lot of kids have a very hard time adjusting to a new home. It's a huge, scary change. Sometimes our minds can play tricks on us when we're feeling overwhelmed or alone. It's a completely normal part of the process. Her face just crumpled. It was like watching a delicate paper sculpture dissolve in the rain. That tiny, fragile flicker of hope I'd seen in her eyes just moments before was extinguished, replaced by a vacant, hollow look I'd seen far too many times on the faces of children who had given up. She had taken a monumental gamble, offering me the most vulnerable part of herself, and she had lost. "I'm not making it up," she said. Her voice thick with tears she stubbornly refused to let fall. "I know you believe what you're seeing and hearing," I replied, deploying a line I'd used 100 times, a verbal pat on the head. "But there are no such things as ghosts, Lily. Let's talk about what's really bothering you. Are you feeling lonely? Are you missing your old friends?" She just shook her head and physically pulled into herself, shrinking in the chair until she seemed even smaller. The rest of the interview was a waste of time. Her answers became monosyllabic, her eyes permanently fixed on that spot on the wall. She had built a fortress around herself, and I was the one who had handed her the bricks. When her adoptive parents, the McGowans, came to collect her, they looked at me with a desperate hope for a simple, clean answer. "She's a wonderfully creative girl with a very big imagination," I told them, my voice radiating a confidence I didn't entirely feel. I handed them a pamphlet for adolescent counseling. She's exhibiting some classic attention-seeking behaviors. She just needs time to adjust and feel secure. I'm sure it will pass. Their relief was a palpable wave in the small room. It was the answer they wanted, the one that required nothing difficult of them. I returned to my desk and pulled up Lily's digital file. My fingers flew across the keyboard, translating a terrified girl's plea into the sterile, detached language of the system. Subject exhibits signs of adjustment disorder. Client is engaging in attention-seeking behavior through the fabrication of paranormal events as a coping mechanism. No credible threat identified. Recommend outpatient therapy to address underlying feelings of displacement. No further action required. Case closed. Another Tuesday crisis averted. I packed my briefcase, straightened my desk, and went home to my quiet, obsessively orderly apartment. Everything had its place. It was my fortress, my sanctuary against the chaos and emotional debris of my job. That night, I poured a large glass of wine and stood before the mantelpiece. The only photograph I displayed was there, a picture of my sister and my nephew, their faces bright with laughter. It was taken 5 years ago, before the slick road and the screech of tires. Before the accident that led to a silence that now filled every corner of my life. I stared at the photo, the old familiar ache tightening its grip around my chest. This was my chaos. This was the ghost I kept locked away. I didn't know it then, but as I stood there, trying to numb my own ghosts with cheap Merlot, the very walls of my perfect, orderly life were already starting to fracture. The name Lily had spoken, Eleanor, was a seed. And in the sterile, self-imposed quiet of my apartment, it had already begun to grow in the dark. The next day, the collapse began not with a bang, but with a whisper. I was working late, a common occurrence, trying to tunnel my way out of the paperwork avalanche. The office was deserted, shrouded in that unique, heavy silence that only empty buildings possess. And then I heard it. A faint, wispy sound like air leaking from a tire, but it had a shape. Frura. My head snapped up so fast a muscle in my neck twinged. The hallway outside my door was a cavern of darkness and shadows. It's the vents, I told myself firmly. The building settling. The exact same rational, dismissive explanation I had given to Lily. But the silence that returned felt different now. Felt heavier, watchful. This kind of job, the secondary trauma, the constant stress and emotional exhaustion. It gets into your head. You start to hear things, see things that aren't there. I shook it off, more annoyed at my own vulnerability than frightened. When I finally got home to my sanctuary, the feeling of wrongness followed me. A book on Jungian archetypes, one I knew for a fact I had shelved that morning, was lying on the floor by the bookcase, its spine cracked open. I stared at it for a long time. Did I knock it off with my bag? I couldn't remember. My movements felt stiff and overly deliberate as I picked it up and placed it back, my hand brushing the spines of the other books as if to ensure they were real. I tried to go about my evening routine, a ritual designed to impose order on a disorderly world, but I couldn't shake the profound, prickling sensation that I wasn't alone. As I stood by the kitchen counter, waiting for the kettle to boil, I felt it. A sudden, piercing, localized cold. It was exactly as Lily had described it. A pocket of frigid air with no discernible source. It wrapped around my arms and the back of my neck, raising goosebumps on my skin. It's just a draft, I told myself, but my own logic sounded thin and unconvincing, a lie I was telling myself to stay sane. That's when my laptop, sitting on the dining table, chimed with a new email notification. It was almost 11 p.m. The sender's address was a meaningless jumble of letters and numbers. The subject line contained a single word. Eleanor. My breath hitched in my throat. My heart began to hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely control the trackpad to click it open. The body of the email was just a single, chilling sentence. You can't bury her forever. Impossible. This was a sick, cruel prank. But who? Who could possibly know? No one knew the whole story of Eleanor Parker. That was a name from a past I had excavated from my life and buried in the deepest, most inaccessible vault of my memory. A name from a closed case that had almost ended my career before it had even truly begun. My mind flew back 10 years, a dizzying, nauseating spiral. I was a junior caseworker, brimming with idealism and ambition, ready to save the world one child at a time. The case involved the Parkers, a wealthy, influential family with connections that ran deep into the city's foundations. Their 8-year-old daughter, Eleanor, had died in what was officially ruled a household accident, a fall down a grand staircase. But there were things that didn't add up. Inconsistent stories from the parents. Faint, fading bruises on the girl's arms that the coroner had dismissed as old. And a scared, withdrawn 10-year-old older brother, James, who told me in a terrified whisper that Eleanor hadn't fallen. She had been pushed, before his parents whisked him away, and his story suddenly, completely changed. I asked questions, but the pressure from my then supervisor, Marcus Thorne, was immense and suffocating. He sat me down in his imposing office and told me, "Sarah, this is a good, grieving family. Sometimes for the good of the system and for the future of your own career, you have to know when to let things go." He didn't just advise me. He guided my hand as I typed the final report. He helped me find the right words to reframe the suspicious details, to twist the facts just enough, to conclude there was no evidence of abuse. It was a lie. A clean, bureaucratic, soul-crushing lie that saved my nascent career. It was my original sin, the rotten foundation upon which my entire professional life had been meticulously built. And I had buried it, and the memory of Eleanor Parker. So deep I had almost convinced myself it never happened. Now someone was digging it up. But how could Lily Anderson, a 15-year-old girl in foster care, be connected? It had to be a coincidence. A deeply troubled girl who overheard a name somewhere, and some random hacker who got lucky with a phishing email. My rational brain, my professional self, clung desperately to that explanation. But the cold, twisting fear in my gut was telling me a different story. If you're still here with me, don't forget to subscribe, activate notifications, leave your like, and share this video with someone. The next morning, I drove to work in a sleepless daze. The world felt thin, like a veil that could be torn at any moment. The first thing I did was call the McGowans, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Hi, this is Sarah Jenkins from CPS," I said, struggling to keep my voice level and professional. "I'm just calling to check in on Lily. I was hoping I could speak with her for a moment, if possible." There was a distinct pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, I'm sorry, dear," Mrs. McGowan said, her tone suddenly clipped and cool, a stark contrast to her desperate warmth the day before. "Lily's not feeling well today. She's resting. That counseling you suggested was a wonderful idea. We've already made her an appointment for next week." "I see. Well, when she's feeling better, could you please have her call my office?" "Of course," she said, her words coming just a little too quickly. "Thanks so much for checking in." She hung up before I could say another word. Felt rehearsed. Felt like I was being managed, handled. Have you ever had that feeling, where the world suddenly tilts on its axis and you realize that nothing is what it seems? That you're a pawn in a game you didn't even know you were playing? I needed to see the original Eleanor Parker file. The physical copy, not the sanitized digital version. The one with my original handwritten notes in the margins. And for that, I needed a supervisor's override to access the deep archives. My current boss, David, was a stickler for the rules. But Marcus Thorne, the architect of the cover-up, the man who had taught me how to bury the truth, was now the regional director. I took the elevator to the top floor, a journey into a different world of polished mahogany, expensive art, and the hushed reverence of absolute power. "Sarah," he said as I was shown into his palatial office. His smile the same predatory, polished thing I remembered so well. "What a pleasant surprise. What can I do for you?" "Marcus," I said, my voice tight, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "I need access to an old file from the archives. The Eleanor Parker case." His smile never wavered, but his eyes went as cold as a winter tomb. The Parker case. My goodness, that was a long time ago. Why on earth would you want to dig that up? I have reason to believe it might be relevant to a current, active case. He leaned back in his leather throne, steepling his fingers beneath his chin. Sarah, you're one of our best. A real asset to the department. You learned early on how this system really works, the necessary compromises. Some things, some very sad things, are better left buried. It wasn't advice. It was a thinly veiled threat. I left his office with a cold, heavy knot of dread in my stomach. He was blocking me. He was afraid. He was part of it. But part of what? That night everything escalated. I was in my living room, jumping at every creak of the building, when I heard it. The soft, melodic, tinkling chime of a child's music box. I don't own a music box. I crept out into the hallway, my heart pounding in my ears like a war drum. The sound was coming from my bedroom. With a trembling hand, I pushed the door open. The room was empty. The music was gone. But there, on my pillow, where nothing had been just an hour before, sat a small, tarnished silver locket. My blood ran cold. I knew it instantly. It was Eleanor's. I remembered it with horrifying clarity from the crime scene photos. The ones that had never made it into the official file. The ones Marcus had made sure disappeared. That was the moment. The breaking point where my carefully constructed reality shattered into a million pieces. Lily wasn't imagining things. This wasn't a coincidence. This was psychological warfare. Someone was using the precise, buried details of my decade-old secret to terrorize me, to gaslight me into questioning my own sanity, employing the very tactics of dismissal and doubt that I had used on a terrified teenage girl. They knew I would dismiss her story. They had counted on my cynical, calloused response. And I had walked right into their meticulously designed trap. I finally truly understood. Lily wasn't just a victim in this. She was bait. And I was the target. Panic is a cold, sharp, clarifying thing. It slices directly through exhaustion and denial, gifting you a terrifying kind of focus. Sitting on the edge of my bed, the tarnished silver locket growing colder and colder in my palm, the last 24 hours clicked into a horrifying, coherent sequence. The whispers in my office, the book on the floor, the anonymous email, Marcus's veiled threat, the music box, this locket. It was all a meticulously crafted campaign of psychological terror. Someone knew my deepest, darkest secret. And they were using it as a weapon. My first coherent thought was of Lily. She was in a house with people who were part of this cruel, elaborate game. Mrs. McGowan's cheerful, dismissive voice on the phone now echoed in my mind with sinister intent. She's resting. 'Twas a lie. They were isolating her, holding her. I had to get to her. I threw a coat over my pajamas, didn't even bother to find matching shoes, and ran to my car, peeling out of my parking spot and speeding toward their address, my mind racing faster than the engine. Who was doing this? It had to be Eleanor's older brother, James. He was just a boy back then, the only other witness to whatever had truly happened on that staircase. He had tried to tell the truth before his family, and the system, my system, had silenced him. A decade is a long, long time to let grief and anger simmer into a cold, calculated rage. The McGowans lived in one of those new, sterile suburbs where every house was a slight variation of the one next to it, a perfect, placid veneer of normalcy. As I pulled up, their house was completely dark except for a single solitary light in an upstairs window. Lily's room. I didn't bother with the front door. I ran around the side of the house, my feet slipping on the wet grass, and peered through the large living room window. I backed away, craning my neck to get a better view of the lit window above. For a fleeting second I saw a silhouette. It was Lily. Then a larger, more menacing figure moved behind her, and the lights snapped off, plunging the house into total darkness. Ice filled my veins. I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911, my voice a panicked, breathless, incoherent mess as I tried to explain that a child was in immediate mortal danger. "Ma'am, can you please tell me the nature of the danger?" the dispatcher asked, her voice impossibly, infuriatingly calm. "I can't explain. You wouldn't believe me." Just send a car. They're isolating her. It's a conspiracy. I knew how I sounded. I sounded unhinged, unstable. The bitter irony was suffocating. I was being dismissed, my desperate plea translated into hysteria, just as I had dismissed Lily. I didn't wait. I ran to the back of the house, where a kitchen door with small glass panes stood between me and Lily. It was locked. In a surge of pure, unthinking adrenaline, I grabbed a heavy garish garden gnome from a flower bed and smashed the glass panel on the door. The sound was like an explosion in the dead quiet neighborhood. I reached a bleeding hand through the jagged opening, fumbled for the lock and stumbled inside. "Lily!" I shouted into the darkness, my voice raw. "It's Sarah Jenkins. I'm here to help you." Heavy footsteps pounded on the stairs. Mr. McGowan appeared at the bottom, his face a mask of fury. "What the hell? Are you insane? You're breaking into my house. Where is she?" I screamed, advancing on him. "She's upstairs, asleep, you lunatic. I'm calling the police." "I already did," I shot back, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. Then Mrs. McGowan appeared behind him, her face pale. And she wasn't alone. Standing right beside her, his face illuminated by the faint moonlight filtering through the broken door, was a man I hadn't seen in 10 years. James Parker, Eleanor's brother. All the air left my lungs in a single painful rush. "You," I whispered. His eyes, no longer the frightened eyes of a 10-year-old boy but the hard, cold eyes of a man who had seen the abyss, were filled with a decade of grief. "Me," he said, his voice steady. It took a while to put it all together, to find the right people. People willing to help a grieving brother find a little justice. The McGowans. They weren't random foster parents. They were part of his plan. This was all an elaborate trap. "What have you done to Lily?" I demanded, my voice shaking uncontrollably. "Nothing," James said calmly. "She's perfectly safe. She was just the key. The key to make you listen. I knew the system wouldn't help me. I knew people like you and Marcus Thorne would just close ranks and protect their own. So I had to create a situation you couldn't ignore. I had to make you feel the same terror a helpless little girl felt before she died. I had to make you feel haunted. The whispers, the book, the email. It was all him. Tiny, sophisticated speakers hidden in my office vents. Powerful magnets under the floorboards of my apartment. He had gaslit me all the way to the truth. Just then, the tranquil suburban night was torn apart by flashing red and blue lights. They painted the walls in strobing, chaotic patterns. 2 uniformed police officers stood at the broken door, their hands on their weapons. "What's going on in here?" one of them barked, his voice booming with authority. "Officer, thank God," Mr. McGowan cried, pointing a trembling finger at me. "This woman, she's a social worker, she's had some kind of breakdown. She just smashed our door and broke into our home." "He's lying," I screamed, my voice cracking. "It's a setup. They're holding a child hostage. This is all connected to the death of Eleanor Parker 10 years ago." The officers exchanged a look of weary pity. They saw exactly what James had intended for them to see. A frantic, unstable woman who had just committed a felony, babbling about conspiracies. "Ma'am, I need you to turn around and put your hands behind your back," the officer said, his voice leaving no room for argument. It was over. I had lost. As the cold metal of the handcuffs bit into my wrists, my eyes met James's across the room. He didn't look triumphant. He just looked profoundly, deeply sad. But then a small, quiet voice cut through the tension from the top of the stairs. "She's not lying." Everyone froze. Lily stood there, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes clear and steady. She walked slowly, deliberately down the stairs. "I'm not sick," she said, her voice growing stronger and louder with each step. "They told me to stay in my room. They said you were a bad person who was coming to hurt me. But I heard everything." She looked at James. "I heard you." Then she looked directly at me. "And I heard the whispers you put in the walls. They weren't just her name. They were telling the story of what really happened to Eleanor. They said she was afraid of him. Afraid of the man who visited. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with a sickening thud. Car door slammed outside. Framed in the doorway, drawn by the commotion, his face a mask of confusion that quickly morphed into horror, was Marcus Thorne. I had been so wrapped up in my own guilt, my own haunting, that I had missed the real target. My cover-up was just a footnote in his much larger, much darker crime. "It was you," I said, my voice barely audible, my gaze locked on Marcus. "You were there that day, weren't you? It wasn't an accident. You were the man who visited." The color drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, gray pallor. He began to stammer, to deny it, but his eyes, wide with panic, gave him away. And in that moment, everyone in the room, the cops, the McGowans, James, Lily, saw it. The cold, ugly, undeniable truth. My collapse was just collateral damage. He had always been the real monster. The aftermath was a storm. James Parker had recorded everything. His conversations with me, the sounds he used to haunt me, and now the raw, chaotic confrontation that had finally exposed Marcus Thorne. He handed it all to the authorities. He had played a long, dangerous, and morally ambiguous game, and in the end he had won. Marcus was arrested that night. The Eleanor Parker case was reopened. The whole sordid story of power, abuse, and a decade-long cover-up orchestrated by a man sworn to protect children became a media firestorm. My career as I knew it was over. Falsifying a case report is a cardinal sin in my profession, a breach of the most sacred trust. I lost my license, my job, and my reputation in a series of quiet, humiliating hearings. My life, that carefully ordered fortress I had built, had completely and irrevocably collapsed. But in the rubble, I found something I thought I had lost forever. Lily was placed in a new home, a real home, with a family who listened to her and believed in her. The last time I saw her was from a distance, watching her meet them. She looked over, saw me standing by my car, and for the first time she smiled at me. A real, genuine smile. It wasn't forgiveness. I knew I didn't deserve that. It was something far more precious. It was understanding. I didn't get away with what I did, and I shouldn't have. I chose the system over a child, I chose my career over the truth, and I paid the price. But by having my own reality torn apart, by being forced to feel the abject terror of not being believed, I finally had to confront the ugly truth I had buried 10 years ago. A social worker laughed at a child's report, and in the 24-hour earthquake that followed, a corrupt and powerful man was brought down, and a brave, resilient girl was finally set free. And in a strange, painful, and deeply humbling way, it freed me too. I lost everything I thought I valued, but in the wreckage, I found a piece of my own humanity I thought was long dead and buried. Sometimes everything has to fall apart before things can ever be made right again. Thank you for listening to my story. Please subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, comment below, leave your like, and share this video with others.